Welcome to a journey through history that will leave you captivated. Today, we're diving into the tumultuous life of Hideki Tojo, a figure shrouded in controversy and pivotal in shaping the course of World War II. From his rise to power within the ranks of Japan's militaristic government to his ultimate downfall and the profound impact he had on millions, Tojo's story is a riveting blend of ambition, strategy, and historical consequence. We will explore his complex legacy, the decisions that led Japan into a devastating conflict, and the haunting aftermath of his actions. This episode promises to unravel the intricate tapestry of Tojo's life and the era that defined him. So, if you're ready for a historical exploration like no other, hit that like button, subscribe for more amazing content, and let us know in the comments what you think about Tojo's controversial legacy. Hideki Tojo, born on December 30th, 1884, in Tokyo, Japan. His father, Hidenori Tojo, a lieutenant general in the Imperial Japanese Army, descended from a noble samurai lineage, while his mother, Chitose Tojo, came from a Buddhist priest's family. Hideki was the youngest of 3 sons, born into a family that enjoyed social respect due to their military and religious backgrounds. Tojo's early years coincided with a period of great transformation in Japan. The country had long been under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, established in the 17th century, which replaced emperors as Japan's rulers. The shogunate era, characterized by feudal wars and strict isolationist policies, saw Japan lagging behind Western powers despite experiencing economic growth and cultural flourishing. The 19th century marked a pivotal shift. Traditionalist samurai and daimyos, known as the shishi, initially resisted Western influence. However, recognizing the need for modernization, they sought to blend Japanese traditions with Western technologies. This led to the Satsuma and Choshu regions forming an alliance and eventually overthrowing the Tokugawa shogunate in the Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, restoring Emperor Meiji to power and marking the beginning of the Empire of Japan. The Meiji Restoration was a significant turning point. Japan rapidly transformed from a feudal state to a modern world power, embracing trade with the West. The military underwent a drastic overhaul, shifting from samurai-led forces to a conscripted army under centralized control. This modernization, however, sparked resentment among traditional samurai, leading to uprisings like the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877. Despite these conflicts, Japan's pursuit of modernization continued unabated. The country embarked on territorial expansion, occupying the Ryukyu Islands and gaining control over Korea and Taiwan after the First Sino-Japanese War. This expansion brought Japan into direct competition with Western powers. The Japanese political system was marked by the significant influence of privileged groups. The emperor's appointments of the prime minister and cabinet were often manipulated by political factions, particularly the Privy Council, allowing these groups to control the government and limit the entry of other factions. The constitution established 2 houses: the House of Peers, consisting of lifelong nobility members, and the House of Representatives, initially elected by the wealthiest 1%. Despite the introduction of universal male suffrage in 1925, the political system continued to favor the elite. The real power, however, rested with the emperor's cabinet ministers, who were not accountable to these houses. Legislative processes required multiple approvals, rendering the houses relatively ineffectual. Amidst this political backdrop, militarists found an opportunity to assert control over the government, bolstered by the nation's increasing military revenue and deep-rooted traditions. The Japanese state experienced internal conflicts and violence as military factions vied for influence over the emperor's Privy Council. Tojo's own upbringing and career played a pivotal role in shaping his character and ambitions. Educated under the Meiji system, which esteemed military training and martial prowess, Tojo developed a belief in the nobility of war and a disdain for perceived weakness. His reputation was built on hard work and self-discipline rather than intellectual prowess. After rigorous training at Army Cadet School and serving in Siberia during the Russian Civil War, Tojo's mistrust and resentment towards America deepened. This sentiment was fueled by the outcome of the Russo-Japanese War and the passing of the Asian Exclusion Act by the United States in 1924, which he perceived as a significant slight against Asians. Tojo's personal life mirrored his strict and disciplined approach. Marrying Katsuko Ito in 1909, they raised their 7 children with the same rigorous standards that defined Tojo's life. His time in Germany for further training in 1919 was a testament to his commitment to military excellence and understanding of international strategies. Tojo was deeply impressed by the discipline and quality of the German officer corps during his time in Germany, despite the military restrictions imposed by the Versailles Treaty. He believed that Japan should emulate these standards, a belief that influenced his later military decisions. Japan's involvement in international affairs during this period was marked by frustration and resentment. The nation's request for racial equality was rejected in the League of Nations, intensifying feelings of alienation. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which limited Japan's naval capabilities, further aggravated tensions. Japan perceived the United States as its main rival in the Pacific and believed that a formidable navy was essential for victory in potential conflicts. Tojo's visit to the United States reinforced his belief in American softness and selfishness, contrasting with the disciplined pursuits he valued. Meanwhile, Japan was grappling with domestic challenges, including an economic downturn and the aftermath of the catastrophic Kanto earthquake in 1923. The government responded with martial law and security measures, including the establishment of the Kempeitai, a military police force. The ascension of Emperor Hirohito in 1926 marked a shift in power dynamics. Hirohito, young and influenced by militarists within the government, became increasingly controlled by military factions. During this period, Tojo rose through the ranks, becoming a colonel and commanding the 1st Infantry Regiment. He co-authored Essays in a Time of National Emergency, advocating for a national defensive state and extolling the virtues of Japanese soldiers. The assassination of Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi in 1932 was a turning point, allowing militarists to gain more influence. Tojo and his peers capitalized on nationalistic sentiments and Japan's warrior culture to foster a sense of national identity and militaristic fervor, aiming to transform Japan into a state focused on military conquest. This ambition led to increased tensions with Western powers and a focus on expansion in East Asia, particularly in China and Manchuria. The Mukden Incident of 1931, a fabricated attack by the Japanese army, served as a pretext for invading Manchuria, illustrating the army's growing autonomy and influence. This occupation marked a significant step in Japan's expansionist ambitions, but also led to international condemnation. The League of Nations' criticism of Japan's actions in Manchuria resulted in Japan's dramatic exit from the organization, leaving the nation isolated and aggrieved. In 1935, Hideki Tojo took command of the Kempeitai secret police in Manchuria, where his decisive leadership style earned him the nickname the Razor. Under his command, the military police became a formidable instrument of state repression in Japan and its colonies. Tojo's strict adherence to orders and protocol won him admiration and promotions as the Japanese military's power surged with its expanding war efforts in Asia. With Japan establishing the puppet state Manchukuo under Emperor Puyi, Tojo played a crucial role in extending Japanese control over northern China. The ongoing civil war between the nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Chinese communists, presented Japan with an opportunity to weaken China and further its annexation plans. The Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937 marked a significant escalation, leading to a full-scale battle and Japan's capture of Beijing. Despite this, Chiang Kai-shek's refusal to surrender led to the war's intensification. During the capture of Nanjing, a horrific massacre of civilians occurred, a dark chapter in history that Tojo, then Chief of Staff, chose to ignore. Despite pouring resources into China, Japan failed to secure complete control, and the conflict dragged on until 1945. Tojo's rise continued, becoming Vice Minister of War in 1938 and Minister of War in 1940, gaining effective control over the Japanese military. A turning point came in 1939 when Japanese forces suffered defeats against the Soviets. This setback led Japan to sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, which significantly influenced World War II dynamics. Internal divisions between the Japanese Army and Navy emerged, with differing views on future expansion strategies. As Japan's relationship with Russia stabilized, focus shifted to military expansion in the Pacific. The fall of Western Europe and the formation of the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy in 1940 marked the alliance of the Axis powers. While the Axis powers cooperated on an intelligence level, Japan primarily engaged in solo combat against the Allied powers in Asia. Japan's occupation of French colonies in Indochina in 1941, following an agreement with Germany and the Vichy government, led to strong protests from the United States and the imposition of an embargo, including a crucial oil supply. This action put Japan at a crossroads between expansion and retreat, with hardline nationalists advocating for continued military expansion. The embargo triggered panic among Japan's more moderate government members, who preferred a peaceful resolution with the United States. However, the militarists, firmly in control, pushed for war. An imperial conference held on September 6, 1941, set a deadline for a diplomatic solution with the US. The failure to reach an agreement by October 14th would make war inevitable. As negotiations between Japan and the United States reached a stalemate, with the US demanding Japan's withdrawal from China and Manchuria, Hideki Tojo and the Japanese leadership saw war as the only viable option. Prime Minister Konoe resigned following the impasse, and on October 16th, Tojo was summoned by Emperor Hirohito to form a new cabinet. The emperor preferred a military leader to guide Japan into the impending conflict. Tojo, seen as the only candidate capable of uniting the army and navy factions, agreed that war with the United States was inevitable. After reviewing war preparations, he concluded that conflict with America was unavoidable and presented this to Emperor Hirohito. On November 2, 1941, Hirohito approved the commencement of hostilities, and the following day, Tojo presented plans for a preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor. Japan's naval strength in 1941 was formidable, making the prospects of success against America appear favorable. With a navy that was the third largest in the world and a concentration of forces in the Pacific, Japan had naval supremacy in the region. Britain and America's naval forces were dispersed globally, giving Japan an opportunity for a swift and powerful strike. The emperor approved preparations for the attack on Pearl Harbor, involving a massive naval task force. The attack was part of a broader strategy involving simultaneous invasions of British and American territories in the Western Pacific, aiming to seize South Asian oil fields to replace lost American imports. On November 26, 1941, a large fleet set sail under Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, resulted in significant damage to the US naval fleet. Following this, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, joining Japan in the conflict. This declaration marked a turning point as Japan now faced the industrial might of the United States. Japan's initial military successes included swift advances through Southeast Asia, capturing key territories like Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Singapore, establishing Japan as a dominant power in Asia and the Western Pacific. Despite these victories, Tojo remained cautious, aware that the United States had not been decisively defeated. His caution proved prescient when the Doolittle Raid in April 1942, a surprise American bombing of Tokyo, shattered the Japanese public's perception of invincibility. In response, 3 American pilots captured during the raid were executed against Tojo's advice as he feared potential retaliation against Japanese prisoners of war. Contrary to his image as a militaristic hardliner, Tojo also took steps to ensure the well-being of the Japanese people, even personally inspecting the rubbish bins outside homes to gauge their food consumption. As Japan's Prime Minister during World War II, Hideki Tojo promoted the concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, portraying it as a coalition of free Asian states led by Japan. This initiative aimed to expel Western powers from Asia, but it was perceived by many, particularly in the West, as a facade for establishing Japanese puppet states. Under Tojo's leadership, Japan enforced strict censorship, with radio broadcasts and newspaper articles heavily monitored. The Kempeitai, Japan's secret police, operated under Tojo's directives, utilizing severe methods, including torture, to extract confessions and ensure total submission and obedience. The military was particularly subjected to this stringent discipline, with surrender strictly prohibited as per the military code of conduct, inspired by elements of Bushido. However, this unwavering adherence to the ancient warrior code had significant consequences during the war. While it produced highly disciplined and fearless warriors, it also fostered intolerance towards enemy prisoners of war and foreigners. Notable incidents of this mistreatment include the Bataan Death March and the construction of the Burma Railway, where the brutal conditions led to the deaths of thousands. During his trial after the war, Tojo claimed that the responsibility for these atrocities lay with field commanders, but it was evident that both his government and he had the power to intervene. The death toll of prisoners of war and civilians at the hands of the Japanese during this period is estimated to be in the millions. One of the most significant setbacks for Japan was the Battle of Midway in June 1942. This battle, where the United States Pacific Fleet destroyed the Japanese carrier striking force, is considered a turning point in the Pacific War. Japan lost naval and air supremacy, rendering the bravery and fanaticism of its soldiers irrelevant. Despite the increasing inevitability of defeat, the Japanese government, including Tojo, sanctioned continued attacks. The US adopted an island-hopping strategy to reclaim strategic islands and eventually bring their forces within range of Japan. The Japanese Navy tried to conceal the extent of their losses at Midway, and even Tojo was kept in the dark about the scale of the defeat for 2 weeks. Upon learning of Japan's significant defeat at the Battle of Midway, Hideki Tojo ordered an increase in conscription, urging all able-bodied men to join the armed forces. However, this effort was insufficient to offset Japan's inability to match the Allies' industrial power. Tojo's tenure was further complicated by internal strife and power struggles within the Japanese military and government, particularly between the Navy and Army factions. By 1944, Japan's situation in the Pacific was critical. American forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz, were tightening their grip on Japan, culminating in the occupation of Saipan. The loss of Saipan and the high Japanese casualties led to Tojo being held accountable, and he resigned as Prime Minister on July 18, 1944. Despite his resignation, Tojo remained dedicated to Japan and expressed his sorrow over the Emperor's burden in a farewell radio broadcast. He continued to advocate for a no-surrender policy, unaware that Japan would soon face even more devastating blows. In the summer of 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. Tojo was widely held responsible for the war in the West, and as American forces began their occupation of Japan, he prepared for the end. On September 11, 1945, when American military police surrounded his house, Tojo attempted suicide but survived. Recovering from his injuries, he was imprisoned and awaited trial for war crimes alongside other high-ranking Japanese officials. During the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, which began in April 1946, Tojo faced charges of war crimes, including Class A, B, and C offenses. He testified, accepting responsibility for starting the war, but argued that Japan was forced into a defensive position due to American foreign policy. The prosecution, led by Joseph Keenan, highlighted Tojo's awareness of the mistreatment of prisoners and civilians by the Japanese army. Tojo denied these accusations, claiming wartime killings could not be criminal. However, all defendants admitted that starting the war was their decision, made with the emperor's approval. Emperor Hirohito was never held accountable due to General Douglas MacArthur's belief that the emperor's cooperation was vital for controlling the Japanese population. The trial, seen by some as unfair, concluded in November 1948 with Tojo and 6 co-defendants sentenced to death. Tojo was executed on December 23, 1948, after issuing a final statement of apology. Following his execution, Tojo's remains were secretly scattered, but Japanese patriots later obtained them. Over the years, shrines have been built in Japan to honor Tojo and his co-defendants, and opinions about Tojo's role in the war remain divided. While some view him and others as victims forced into war, others blame him for starting a conflict Japan could not win, leading to immense suffering and loss of life. What are your thoughts on Tojo's role in history? Do you think he was solely responsible for Japan's actions during World War II? Or was he a product of the times? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this journey through history as enlightening as we did, please hit that like button, subscribe for more captivating stories, and don't forget to turn on notifications to never miss out on our future explorations.